Good afternoon, everyone. It's 5 o'clock Wednesday, Whiskey Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for the Whiskey Wednesday webcast. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast.com studios here in Haddonfield, New Jersey, the charming yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield. And fortunately, it's actually dry because it's the first day in a few days where we haven't had a lot of rain to worry about. So, almost decided to take the gear outside today and do this show from the front porch, but it's still just a bit windy outside, and I didn't want to have a lot of wind interfering with the noise and interfering with our conversation. We've got a panel of distillers and people from around the industry from all over the world joining us in the next few minutes here on the webcast. You can submit your comments and questions and anything else you'd like to add in the chat windows. If you're watching us on Twitter, you should not respond via a comment in Twitter. We will not see that in the comments area until after the show ends. So please either switch over to Periscope and watch us on Periscope, YouTube Live, or Facebook in the WhiskyCast Facebook page if you want to add comments in while we're live on the air. Now, we have to start off with just a little bit of news. Not sure if you saw our Twitter feeds earlier today or on social media, but Glenfarclas Distillery in Scotland has announced that it will not be reopening its visitors center at all during 2020, nor offering tours or the gift shop even. They had thought about opening the gift shop and then decided not to so that they could support local retailers. Instead of trying to sell bottles at the shop, they wanted to be able to send people into the nearby town of Aberlour and to the other shops around Speyside to buy bottles for if anybody's visiting the area, which frankly they shouldn't be right now anyway. But I did talk with George Grant from Glenfarclas earlier, and I want to give you some of his reasonings here, why they decided to go ahead and shut the place down for the rest of the year.
The summer season isn't really going to happen. Obviously, it would only be earlier at this point we would start hiring temporary staff coming for the upcoming summer season. Realistically, lockdown here isn't going to finish for at least another month, if not longer, and it's going to be bars and restaurants are going to be past that too. And then also we want to ensure that the staff that are working at the distillery are happy and safe coming to work. Part of the thing about people trying to visit the distillery is also going on tours, and we just felt as though we wouldn't be able to offer that in a safe environment. And especially doing a tour, if we are continuing to do this safe distancing of having people a certain distance 6 feet 2 meters apart, you can't really do that in a working distillery, which is so noisy.
Now, there's a really very serious reason that also played a role into this that hasn't been discussed openly, and I didn't even know about it until George mentioned it during our interview. They lost a bottling hall worker to the coronavirus. One of the approximately 3,500 or so Scots that have died from the pandemic so far. And so that played a factor into their thinking too as well. They also had not hired up staff because of the cancellation of the Spirit of Speyside Festival. Now, I am fully expecting that this is not the only distillery that we're going to see in Scotland that's going to make an announcement like this. I want to bring in William Wemyss now, joining us from Scotland, the managing director of Wemyss Malts, and also the managing director of Scotland's Kingsbarns Distillery. William, how are you doing today?
Good, Mark. Very nice to be on your show. This is my first live stream, so we'll see how it goes. But thank you for the invitation. Very nice to be here. And firstly, our commiserations to everybody in the States for COVID. I know it's been really tough for you guys, so we feel for you.
We feel for you guys in Scotland as well, and the news out of Glenfarclas just reinforces how serious this is. What are your plans right now at Kingsbarns? Have you made a decision about the rest of the year yet?
I suspected when I saw your headline that question might be coming to me at some stage this evening. We haven't, to be honest. George seems a bit ahead of the game, so I was slightly taken aback by that bit of news. I mean, we don't anticipate being able to open really until probably July at the earliest. And even then, we will have to work out plans to make sure it's viable in terms of keeping visitors safe, keeping our team safe, respecting social distancing. We don't even know whether that's going to be possible. So we haven't done any work into that yet. So it's certainly, it's certainly not imminent. So I guess there won't be too many American golfers coming to see us this year, sadly. But there we go. We'll wait for the British Open next year at St Andrews.
And you have a even bigger situation with you because Kingsbarns is located right outside of St Andrews, which normally would be crawling with tourists this time of year. What kind of impact is that going to have for you guys, business-wise?
Yeah, so it's amazing. You walk at the back of the RNA at the Royal Nature at this time of year, and it sounds like Manhattan. It's just full of American voices. So yeah, it'll be really disappointing not to be able to welcome lots of your compatriots to the distillery and to the sort of wider East Nuke area. But it sort of is what it is. We're lucky we have a single malt now in bottle that we launched last year. So we have export sales and things like that. When our European and Asian markets open up, we haven't launched in America yet for all the import tariff reasons that I'm sure you've discussed rather on previous broadcasts. So yeah, it's disappointing, but we have a big Open Championship coming to St Andrews next year. So really hope by then we've got a vaccine and we can welcome your compatriots in the tens of thousands to the St Andrews area.
I've got a question for you because I was under the impression they were just pushing this year's at Royal St. George's back a year. Have you coming to St. Andrews this year?
I haven't actually looked at it. I think next year, 2021, I might be wrong on this. I think 2021 was a big, was it 150th British Open, something like that. And it was coming back to the RNA at St Andrews. So whether they've made changes and pushed everything back a year, you may well know more than me.
I remember reading when they made the announcement that they were just going to push everything back a year, but I could be wrong about that. We'll have to check into that because obviously the Open comes to St. Andrews every 5 years as just a way of life for everybody.
Yeah, that has been. It's every 5 years. It turns all the wee roads around the distillery into chaos. It sort of is what it is. I've learned over the last couple of months, you try and second guess COVID, it's a waste of time. Don't spend too much of my limited brain matter trying to do that because it's better just to roll with it. And, the most important thing is that people are safe and sound. And as long as the distillery's here in 100 years, we'll all be okay.
And how is your staff doing?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't lost anybody like George's team member. That's just so sad to hear. It's the first. I'm sure there've been others in the Scotch whisky industry, but it's certainly the first fatality from COVID I've heard of in the Scotch whisky industry. We're all thankfully safe and well, touch wood. And long may that continue. We're still locked down here, getting a bit tetchy. So I've had to have a dram since it's a Wednesday night.
Well, pour yourself something. And while I bring in our other guests, I want to bring in our longtime pal, Lisa Wicker from Widow Jane, Rob Dietrich from Blackened American Whiskey, and Scott Blackwell from Highwire Distilling in Charleston, South Carolina. Guys, welcome to Whiskey Wednesday. And we'll start with William. What's in your glass right now? What are you drinking?
Are you talking to me? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, William. What's in your glass?
Yeah, so I'm having a wee dram of our Wemyss malts, Nectar Grove, which is a Madeira finished blended malt. I cracked it open tonight, actually. It's a 46% non-chill filtered. Enjoying it. Lisa,
what's in your glass?
I have 3 glasses.
Okay.
Yes. Peerless bourbon. I have Wilderness Trail bourbon, and I have some Widow Jane 10.
Which Widow Jane do you have?
The flagship, the 10-year, the 5-barrel small batch. Yeah.
Rob, I'm betting you have batch 100 of Blackened.
I have been sipping on a little bit of that. I've got that, and then I've got my backup with the ice cube. That's which I jokingly call the whiskey Rob. Just whiskey and ice. But if you're trying and just tasting, I got the batch 100.
And I'm betting that Scott has some Jimmy Red bourbon.
Well, Mark, you would be incorrect. I actually. I have some water right now, but I'm getting my delivery here. So, what do I have here?
And for the record, I pulled a as I noted, a couple of days ago, I spent some time better part of 2.5 days dusting the shelves behind me here, and I found a 15-year-old Glenbergie that was bottled for the Chivas Brothers Cask-Strength edition that they sold at the distillery shops. This was a 92 distillate that was bottled in 2007. And I think I got this one at Glenlivet Distillery when I was there in 2010. So this thing's been sitting on my shelf for 10 years, and I'm still making a reasonably good dent in it, but it has held up well, and fortunately the cork didn't destroy itself.
Yeah.
So, Rob, let's talk to you first about batch 100 of Blackened, because this is the first batch where the boys in the band let you create the playlist, right?
They did. It was pretty extraordinary. I got to tell you, I was very, very honored and humbled to be able to get to pick the playlist. You know, they asked me to pick 12 songs, and you know, and generally that's you know, it's kind of 6 to 12 songs. So I literally went down the Metallica rabbit hole. I'm a huge fan of Metallica since the 7th grade. So I was able to kind of dig through all the archives of music and find some really fun live stuff from the 1980s, all the way up to last year where they did All Within My Hands, a live record as well. So they actually they decided to take that playlist that we play that music to the whiskey at a low frequency, moving those barrels vigorously, so that whiskey's moving in and out, and they decided to lay down those tracks on vinyl. So we did a batch 100 box release with 2 vinyl records with that playlist that was played to batch 100. And as well as the bottle of batch 100 and a couple other goodies in there. So it's pretty extraordinary. I feel very honored.
If I remember correctly, I don't even think they let Dave Pickerel pick a playlist, or did they?
I don't think there was enough time. You know, it was such a short window that by the time they launched Blackened, and by the time of his unfortunate passing, I don't think that that the idea had come to surface yet. But I do not doubt that they would have. He was such a huge Metallica fan as well. I know that he would have been picking probably this playlist. So I made sure that I did some dedications to Dave on the playlist as well as on the record. So it was really, really great to see this collaboration come together.
And it's nice to see that your brand team is watching. They say hi, Rob.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Well, you know what? And it's been extraordinary. This was such a group effort. I mean, everybody put so much heart and soul into, the packaging and just trying to identify how we're going to distribute this thing, because it's really nothing's been really released like this before. So it's been pretty extraordinary. We've got a great team at Sweet Amber.
Once again, we can put in your questions and put your questions to our guests. All you have to do is send them along to us. And speaking of people that hang out with our friends here on the panel, Steve Bishore, our pal from Mount Vernon, says, cheers to Lisa, because I know, Lisa, you work with Mount Vernon. When are you heading back down there again, or do you know yet?
I don't know. I actually had a trip canceled because I with all this stuff unfolding, in Brooklyn, right? And I got down there. Steve started sending fermenters the last couple of days of February, and so I got down there for those. I was down there for 3 or 4 days, I guess, or 4 days, and thought I was going to return. I'm usually back there for the finish run and didn't make it back. He's actually doing the finish runs right now. He and Corey, 2 of them, for the right? And they held those strips and then are finishing those out right now. But it's weird for me not to be there for the finishing run.
And we have to point out just for a second here, William was having some technical problems connecting from Scotland and has been connecting and reconnecting. So we're going to pull him out of the stream for just a second here until he can reconnect in and we can get his connection issues sorted out. Rob, we have a question from Malt Mariners. Is Blackened available in Germany? Haven't come across it yet, and I don't believe it is it?
It is not. We've had a lot of our international community very excited about the release of Blackened. Obviously, a lot of international Metallica fans as well as whiskey aficionados, and we are right now. Obviously, I think just like everyone, we're putting on the brakes, working on our national market where we already have our distribution, and as soon as we can, all kind of get back to some level of normalcy, we are working on our international distribution. So we are working on that, and we appreciate your patience.
William has rejoined us now. William, just talk to us for a second so we can make sure the audio is working properly.
Is that any better?
Go one more time, William.
Is that any better? Can you hear me?
Perfect. We got you now. Great. Thank you and welcome back in. And
Thanks.
I want to pose a question here before we get around to everybody. With the announcement today out of Glenfarclas and the fact that we're starting to see, in the States at least, some distilleries, or at least some states, opening up to the point where I know that theoretically some of the gift shops in Kentucky at the distilleries could open up as early as today, although I haven't gotten any word of any actually doing it. What's the future holding for distillery tourism? And Scott, I'm going to point this one at you first, because being in Charleston, you guys are dependent on tourism almost as much as bottle sales, right?
Yes, we are. We've been working on sort of what we're going to do. I think we had 7 million visitors here last year. Obviously, we didn't have all those at the distillery, but I think data showed that 92% of our folks through the door came from out of town. That we are legally allowed to be open now. We are not at the distillery. We weren't quite ready to, we haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do that safely. But we just met with some legislators in the last few days, and we are submitting a bill to the state to try and change some things that would hopefully attract more locals in the door. We're just hunkering down. I mean, we realize that 2020 is just pretty much going to be a super rocky road. Really been spending a lot of time focusing on big picture, and just thinking longer term. I think if we sat and thought about our day to day, we started selling hand sanitizer like a lot of other folks. And last week, I think, we probably had, 50 or so people through the door. The week before that, when we didn't have it, we may have had 3. It was really, so.
And I think we're answering Chris Radcliffe's question here. For smaller distillers, how important are distillery tours for both engaging customers and generating revenue? And I think we've addressed that pretty much with all 3 of you, with Lisa, with you at Widow Jane as well. I know tourism is important, but maybe not as important to you. I don't know. Tell me.
Engaging the customers are certainly, even the people that know us from their regular retail shelves, they come to New York and, we're frequently on their list. It isn't a make or break for us. It just is sad. Red Hook has been hit hard, in Brooklyn in particular. And, you miss it, right? We're looking at opening back up June 8th, but not retail and not our bar. Britannica is not going to be open as yet. But
so you'll open up for tours, but not not open to the public, but open for distilling.
Yeah, just distilling and bottling. Yeah, we're going to open back up and blending. We've got people going in right now. I'm back in Bardstown, and we've got people going in every day, but they're socially distanced. Somebody's in the warehouse, somebody's in the distillery, and everybody's taking turns, feeding the chickens and, all those kind of day-to-day chores with the mail and things. But they're fortunately for us, we do have a father and son that live together that are also on our team. So they are actually moving some furniture and things so that we can spread out in the distillery. So we're doing everything we can. Fortunately for us, one of the brands in our portfolio, Philadelphia Distilling, is making hand sanitizer, and so we're doing what we can. We're buying masks and assigning lockers and everything that we can think of beforehand.
We have a question for you also from Chris Radcliffe. What is it about Red Hook, the neighborhood in Brooklyn where you're located, that seems to be encouraging the food and drink scene there? Of course, that was the home of Linnell's for years, and a bunch of other great bars and really cool restaurants, and your distillery and a couple of others as well. What is it about that neighborhood?
It's so funny, because I think most people that know me know that my primary residence is Bardstown, Kentucky, but I was living in Brooklyn 90% of the time before all of this hit. The the thing that surprises me most about Red Hook that is very similar to Bardstown is that it's a village. It's so funny. It's a village with a view of the Statue of Liberty. It's a village with the view of Lower Manhattan. But you go, and I go into the neighborhood bar, and they know who I am. And you run into people you know in the grocery store. But that tight-knit network is pretty phenomenal. You know, our team at Widow Jane, they know everybody at this restaurant, and they know everybody at that restaurant. And you know, there's a lot of just personal recognition, but that there's definitely a tight sense of community there, and a lot of support within the community. And Red Hook's also just a really cool place to come. You know, I think people feel like if they're in Manhattan and they come out to Red Hook, they're getting away, you know? so you know, cobblestone streets, and we're on the waterfront, and
a lot like Charleston in a few ways, I would think. And Scott, we didn't point out that on top of all this, you and Ann, your wife and business partner, just moved to the distillery into a brand new building a couple of months ago, right?
Yeah, it was poor timing. But Ann pointed out the other day, our new facility is 23,000 square feet, and our old facility was 6,000. So our tasting room is significantly larger. So we have room for about 75 seats in there. At the old location, which you visited, Mark, had I think 14. So we definitely have room to distance in there. You know, but it's definitely been a challenge. Our equipment was not online when this hit. We scrambled, and to be honest, the blessing in disguise of making hand sanitizer it allowed us to run some grain that and run some product that no one was ever going to drink. So you know, we've kind of made lemonade out of lemons, and we're happy to be there. But yeah, it was not ideal. We were open for 5 days and had to shut back down. But
that's tough.
Yeah.
Tell me about are there any struggles for you in terms of independent bottling right now, in terms of being able to run bottling facilities, in terms of being able to get your stuff out and around? What's been the impact for your independent bottling side, Wemyss Malts?
Mark, I can hardly hear you, I'm afraid.
Okay.
We've got bandwidth problems. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. What has the pandemic meant for you in terms of being able to run the independent bottling side of your business? Have you been able to get stuff bottled and shipped? Where do you stand on that?
I can hardly hear you, I'm afraid, Mark.
Okay, let's have you reconnect back in. We're going to pull you out of this and have you reconnect back in. And we'll go back to Rob for a second. You are somewhat fortunate in that you don't have a distillery yet to work with, and I know that there are plans for that down the road. Has anything been done on that since we last talked at Whiskey Fest last fall?
You know, it's certainly something that we've always got in consideration. Obviously, my background has been with distillery grain to bottle, so that's something that would be exciting at some point. But right now, given the circumstances, it actually is somewhat advantageous for us to be a little bit lean in the sense of in not having an overhead for that production. So I feel that we're very fortunate in that sense. And we're also very fortunate that the partners that we're working with are continuing their the production, but doing it with obviously new safety standards and probably similar safety standards to what they already had, but obviously with new understanding with COVID and shifting with that. So it's been fortunate for us in that sense that we've been able to be lean with that and just really kind of focus more on the marketing aspect and really just focus on the safety of our sales team and the production folks. And
you're still working with the folks at WhistlePig to do the actual bottling and blending, right?
Correct. Yeah. So they've got two facilities. They've got their one in Vermont, which is such a beautiful distillery. I'm sure you've seen it several times. And then we're working at the production facility in Mineville, New York. And that's where we're doing the black noise sonic enhancements, as well as our cask finishing and the Spanish brandy barrels, and all the bottling and filtration goes on there as well. So So we're very fortunate to still have close contacts with everyone in the production facility still working.
What's the latest on your market expansion? How many states are you in now? We talked about your international sales or lack thereof right away, but how many markets are you in now, and how far can you expand production, at least to get out to more people? Because I have to admit, I've only seen it on the shelves once or twice.
Well, New Jersey was, we were poised to launch in New Jersey. We had already worked with a distributor there. So that was, again, this really did bring a lot of things that were in full motion to a somewhat of a grinding halt. And it's allowed us to just really focus on the markets that we already are in. So we obviously launched in a lot of the larger states, New York, California, Texas, Florida, and then we were able to expand into the smaller markets. I think our first market was Wisconsin, was because the band actually played there, and that was our first launch was there in Wisconsin. So we've actually opened up to quite a few markets. I think we're up in the 30s now. The control states have been very interesting as they are with as everyone knows, but it's been really exciting because they've been excited about the product because they've had people actually requesting for it in some of those control states. So we're very fortunate in that aspect to help kind of move things along in that area.
And your colleagues have kindly provided us with a link where people can find out who is selling it and who has it available.
Perfect. I'm always joking. I'm the analog guy.
Media team behind you, isn't it?
Right. Well, I can make whiskey. I'm the analog guy. When it comes to digital, this is someone on my team recently called me a Luddite, and it's not too far off. So I don't mind that terminology.
We keep you'll see the shot change around a little bit here because we are trying to get William back in. And William, can you hear us? Live television, guys, there's nothing quite like it. Yeah. We'll give that another try in just a minute here. And I know Doug Schaefer is waiting for you to get a distillery, Rob, because he wants to know, does Sweet Amber Distillery, which is the company that you work under, have tours? Obviously, not yet. But he thinks at some point it would be a popular destination for the Metallica family, and I'm sure it would.
Absolutely. I mean, just like anything, it's always exciting to see where your favorite whiskey is produced. And then, you're already a fan, then you walk away a lifetime fan after you've just been in there and smelled the visceral experience of distillation, fermentation, distillation in the barrel house, So absolutely, that is something that we certainly always have on the table. And, currently right now with the new, new world, what's going on, we're that's always something we were talking about, but it's exciting just to kind of plan for that in the future.
I have an interesting question here from Tyrone Coty in Nova Scotia. Does anyone have a sense, or at least a rough percentage, how much annual Scotch and whiskey might be down this year? And I'm assuming he's talking sales. We know that off-premise sales, the liquor store sales, are up in a lot of places with people drinking at home. On-premise sales at bars and restaurants have just collapsed and cratered. But any idea, what are you hearing from your salespeople in terms of where sales might go this year?
As far as Blackened goes, we obviously on premise has taken a big hit, but having really kind of basically recently started up in the last couple of years, we've been focusing on our off premise, and for everyone out there, on premise are your restaurants and bars, and off premise is your liquor stores, which those retailers are still open, and we want to give them the support that they need to be able to stay functioning and stay alive. And obviously whatever we can do for restaurants and bars, which is just kind of difficult right now. It's, there's a lot of places that are doing, in Colorado, they're doing this, but they're doing cocktails to go, which is a great program. I know some states probably haven't allowed that, but they've been a little lenient, excuse me, in just kind of a temporary bend of the law, so to speak, to be able to allow some, takeout cocktails. And I think once the dust settles, that might be something that actually stays. So that could help the restaurants and bars be able to get themselves back up. So, going back to the original question, honestly, we haven't really been able to project, exactly, numbers are obviously going to be down a little bit because we don't have those on premise or those restaurant sales, but we're still going strong, and that's really, it's exciting.
We are still trying to get William Wemyss back into the stream here, and as you can see, every time I try to punch this into another shot, it doesn't quite work. So we're going to try this again. We'll keep hoping to come back to him. And as Graham Fraser pointed out, online sales of drinks and spirits have boomed here in the UK during lockdown. Charlie Prince, great show, great panel, very timely subject. And David Volkov, Arizona, is doing bottle sales as well as at bars and restaurants. And Scott, what are you hearing in South Carolina about cocktails to go when you can reopen?
Not much. We tried to go directly to the governor on a couple of things, and it just fell on deaf ears. They even were doing curbside service for breweries and wineries in the state. We don't really have wineries here. So we realized that we were sort of the redheaded stepchildren. But thankfully, and I just think it's not really a priority, our voice is fairly new here in the state. Breweries obviously have much bigger presence and bigger voice. But we did have some legislators reach out to us recently and ask, what can you do? So we are hopefully filing this bill this week to make a few changes. Cocktails to go is not in that bill. I think that's going to be more of an executive order type thing. So we'll keep plugging away. But South Carolina is a conservative state, and it's an interesting place. Charleston is a little island, and that's why we love living here. But the rest of the state, where I'm from, upstate in Greenville, it's a much more conservative environment. So it's baby steps. We actually can serve cocktails at the distillery now, which is huge. So we're trying to improve upon that and really focus on getting more locals in the door and expanding our offerings in the building, and then maybe next go to that. But they're allowing beer and wine sales to go from restaurants and bars, so you can sell a packaged bottle of wine or a 6-pack of beer, but no spirits or no cocktails.
And we should point out that it wasn't that long ago when bars in South Carolina could only stock 50 ml airline bottles. And you guys had to make cocktails with the 50 milliliter airline bottles to guarantee a certain level of pour. So you're right.
It was something like that. It was political.
Liquor is always political, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Well, we had a guy named Strom Thurmond, if you remember that guy.
Oh yeah. And
he was behind that. So if you have any Strom Thurmond fans out there, you can thank them for that. But if you didn't like the guy, well, he's gone, and so are the mini bottles. So
Lisa, tell me about this barrel program that you just started with your 13-year-old. Lucky Barrels, I think is the term for it.
Oh, Lucky 13. Lucky 13 is actually our single barrel. That was our 12-year-old single barrel, and trying to figure out what to do with it. All of a sudden, it's 13 years old, right? And we had how do I put this? We had barrels coming in under our normal 99 proof. And I have to be able to proof it down with some limestone water. And the barrels were exceptional. They're delicious, but they weren't fitting our program. And so we reworked it into Lucky 13. And so what I'm doing is we have a range of proofs on them, anywhere from, fortunately for me, Widow Jane was already into odd numbers because I like odd numbers. So 91, 93, 95, and so on. And so I will proof it down to the next proof point that makes sense to make sure I can get our water in, because number one, it's our signature, and number two, it does change the whiskey, quite a bit. And so that's Lucky 13, and we released it. Actually, it went on the truck the day before I closed the distillery. We had that, and we did Decadence. It's a maple maple cask finished bourbon as well. And so that's, that's held our sales really strong off premise for sure. But yeah, it's been really popular. We hit the of all of the, the gloomy stuff that's been happening, we hit the target. We kept trying to keep everybody together. Things were happening really terribly and quickly in Brooklyn. And I had told my boss on a Sunday, I said, I'm going to close the distillery Friday. On Monday, I told him I was closing the distillery on Thursday. On Tuesday, I'm going to close the distillery tomorrow. And, but and he called about something else on Tuesday. He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Standing in the pouring rain, watching watch the products go on the truck." We hit it, we made it. And now it's time for everybody to go home. So like I said, Brooklyn, Brooklyn's still, I think the worst case scenario is still in the United States, right?
And we should also point out, you mentioned the water source. You recently, that has been a source of, shall we say, some controversy.
Notoriety, yes.
For Widow Jane in the past.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I even got an email from a longtime listener who knew that you were going to be on the show today, and she said, "Ask Lisa what's going on with that water source and whether they're going to do anything up to support that mine and stuff." And
we have.
Yeah. But you actually announced this a few weeks ago.
We do. We've got a partnership now with Century House. Century House is, there's a whole long story that I won't get into, but it actually belonged to the Snyder that owned the mines originally. And that Widow Jane folklore that came out of that, there was dissenting opinions on what that folklore was all about. So when I started with Widow Jane, that was one of the things, that we focused on, was getting that, our labels reflect that we're the waters from the Rosendale mines, not from the Widow Jane mines. You can go visit the Widow Jane mine. It's right behind the Century House in Rosendale, New York. And like I said, we've started a new partnership with them. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have a party in the mine this summer to kind of kick that all off. And so I don't know when that's going to happen, hopefully this fall. But then our mine backs up on that mine. So you've got the Widow Jane mine, our mine backs up on it. And, ours, of course, is under lock and key because, me, Mark, I'm pretty picky when it comes to my whiskey. I'm not picky about other stuff, but so I go up occasionally and do cave checks, and it's a remarkable place. You go and you open the door and your eyes start to adjust, and you're just hit in the face with this gorgeous smell like fresh spring rainwater on dirt. It's just the best. So yeah. Anyway, but we've got that all I guess straightened out from the previous ownership. So
okay, good to hear.
Yeah.
And Scott,
is
there a crop of Jimmy Red corn in the fields this summer?
Yes, I'm pleased to say there are several crops. We because of this new facility, we ordered a new still in addition to the one we already had, a Carl, and it's an 8,000 liter, which basically quintuples our previous abilities. So funny thing was we were getting asked by the farmers, "Hey, we need our seed to get things going." It was the week of where the pandemic really hit, and Ann and I had to make some tough decisions around, what do we do? We were just all kind of in shock. And plus we were just exhausted from construction. It was like our minds were definitely not right at that point. But we planted a little over 300 acres in March, and everything is looking really good. We added 4 more farms. We like to spread them out around the state just in case we have a tornado or hurricane, something like that. We went out to a field, I guess 2 weeks ago, and we've got some really cool new farmers that are trying some new things that we feel really good about, more sustainable practices and things like that. So we're hoping to get about 1.2 million pounds this year. And big picture wise, we're getting we'll be finished with our last year's harvest in about a month. So we're making rye right now this week, We only have a couple of people in production, so we've been able to kind of keep things open and up, because in 20,000 square feet, there's plenty of ability for those guys to stay away from each other. And so
we have a question for you also from Steve Bishore. He wants you to talk about working with Glenn Roberts at Anson Mills, because they've used the grain at the Mount Vernon grist mill. And Glenn was the guy who hooked you on Jimmy Red, right?
He is. Yeah. We've known Glenn for years. I've been in the food business pretty much my whole life, and Glenn owns a more or less I'd say rice is his big thing, Carolina Gold rice, but he also does a ton of grit corns. When we were looking around, Ann and I were looking around for something that was, I wouldn't say indigenous to this area, but had been here for a long time. And we went down to Clemson at the research center, and he had all these bags of corn spread out on the table. And I knew we wanted to make bourbon, and I knew corn was the base, and I knew Glenn was the guy that had the most knowledge that we knew around corn. So he went through about 40 bags, and anybody who's ever dealt with Glenn knows that he has the gift of gab. So this took quite a few minutes, and then I pointed to a bag that he kept skipping over in the middle of the table. I said, "What's that one?" And he said, "Oh, that's Jimmy Red. Yeah, that's the one you want." I'm like, "Why couldn't we just have skipped right there in the beginning?" But I think he's an educator, and we love hanging out with him. We took 2 trips to Mexico last year with him, with some geneticists working on maize research. And a lot of people don't realize that all corn came from Mesoamerica. And so Native Americans moved it, and there are still Native Americans in Mexico. We call them Mexicans, but there are, the Mayans and the Zapotecs and, Mixtecs and, all kinds of really cool little indigenous populations down there. So, and their seeds and their varieties they're very protective of. So Glenn, over the years, works mainly with chefs. I would say I just texted with him today. He was he's neck deep in rice right now in Texas. They grow a ton of rice in Texas. And he said, I guess there's a lot going on with China and, seed security and biosecurity and things of that nature. So he's an interesting cat.
Can you hear us?
What's that?
William, can you hear us?
Oh.
William, are you there? We can see you.
The band, we've got some problem. I don't know if can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We had a comment from Tyrone.
I'm struggling with an internet connection.
It suggests that you touch the stone from Outlander and drop your local internet provider. You got BT or Vodafone?
Yeah, we got fiber here in Edinburgh, so I don't really know what the problem is. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. So let's get back to that question while we still have you for whatever length of time we can make it work. But tell me about the...
I can't hear you.
What are you facing as far as independent bottling right now with Wemyss Malts? Are you able to get stuff produced? William, can you hear me? William, can you hear me? I'm assuming everybody else can hear me, because otherwise everybody else would be saying, "We can't
hear you intermittently, Mark." I can hear every third word. Something about bottling.
Yeah, are you able to get whiskeys bottled right now?
You need subtitles, Mark.
Can you hear everybody else? William, I apologize for this, because I know it's as frustrating for you. It's more frustrating for you being on that end and not being able to do anything about it. I'm going to go ahead and let you go since it's late there, and we will get you back on another time here soon when we can get you have you talk. Oh, is that okay with you? I'm going to go with the silence implies consent. theory here. So we will connect with William later on at another time and get him back on. As Graham points out, it's a clear signal in Stirling, Scotland. Must be an Edinburgh problem. It can be a configuration problem. It can be as if you heard one of our shows a couple of weeks ago where we had massive echo issues. It can be anything as just even a misapplied setting at my end, for crying out loud. So it can be just about anything here. So Greg wants to know in Paris, and this is for you, Scott, can you show us a bottle of whiskey one of your bottles for us, as he puts it, unknowledgeable EU folks who don't get your whiskeys?
I can maybe arrange that in just a second. I'm sitting.
Actually, I can do it even better because,
as you can tell, I'm sitting in my living room.
Well, I'm sitting in my office.
I have a lot of bottles in here, but
just a second here.
This is my living room.
Oh wow, nice! That's a nice living room.
Listening to you, but I had to unplug.
Too convenient. You could just reach over while you're,
There we go.
Yeah.
Because I happened to have the bottle that you sent me of the Jimmy Red.
Oh, cool.
But it was only about 6 feet away, but I had to unplug my earpiece so that I could stretch. But this is your Le Creuset bottle of the Jimmy Red bourbon from last year, which I definitely appreciate and will enjoy. But this is one of the ones that they've produced that, well, since Le Creuset is a French company, you ought to be able to get some of that into France, I would think.
No. You can hardly get it in the United States. That's our, limited edition bottle. We are out of those and have been for some time. We are, our typical bottle is glass. I'll see if I can't get one and I'll hold it up here, but yeah.
And
my marketing skills are
ceramic.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty good at the marketing stuff, but I've got like half a brain these days.
Oh, it's not a problem at all. And Chris Radcliffe also points out, when my lottery numbers come up, I'll open a distillery somewhere in England and we can make some crazy stuff. Yes, that's what you really need to do, is to hit the lottery to make the work.
Definitely.
Make a lot of money, and to make a small amount of money making whiskey, you got to start with a large amount. It goes downhill from there.
I always describe it as a reverse pyramid scheme.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the money keeps going out the door and just keeps building out the door, especially when you're laying whiskey down, right? So.
Yep, that's true. Hang on a second here. I had a question. Really interesting. We had a good one here from, let me just pull it up here. I have to scroll back through here. Radcliffe wants to know, I've always wanted to try a maple finished whiskey. How come it's so rarely used? Well, part of the reason is because maple doesn't hold liquid long enough to let you do anything with it. But have any of you ever tried anything with a maple finish, and what does it add? At least I figure you probably have tried something at some point.
Well, we just released our Decadence, actually, and it is a partnership with Crown Maple, which is a New York maple syrup company, and we let that rest in cask that held maple syrup, and yeah, it's wonderful. I have been playing. You said we were possibly going to have to talk about some new product. I'm always playing with wood finishes, right? So there's always goofy stuff all over everywhere. And but charring maple, I've done some trials on that. It's got some promise to it. I don't know. I can't imagine what a maple barrel costs. Do you guys know?
They are hard to find just because they're good for dry goods, but nobody uses barrels for dry goods anymore. So, yeah. And let's see here. Question from Malt Mariners. Haven't made many whiskey exhibitions in Germany before the lockdown. We're quite busy. Usually only do the bottle market in Bremen and Hansa Spirit in Hamburg. All three of you have been a veteran of whiskey events. When do you think we might actually start getting back to traveling again and actually being able to do events?
I got to say, I feel like it's going to be 2021 for sure. I can't imagine too many people are going to feel comfortable in a crowded room, shoulder to shoulder, tasting whiskey. If anything, it's going to at least redefine how we do these kind of events. Spacing, social distancing. It's not going to be these tight little rooms that we're used to, or these ballrooms or banquet rooms or things of that nature. So I think it's certainly going to change the face. Even after we start back up, I feel like it's going to change the face of what we do.
And Tracy McCoy has a great comment. Finding some Widow Jane when this craziness is over. Lisa looks like a sister in whiskey. And you've been doing this for quite a while, so.
Oops.
Yeah, you're the first person that interviewed me when I was at Limestone Branch, and I had
Yeah, that was
a product that they actually allowed at Bourbon Festival to pour because it wasn't true bourbon. It was the first spirit with any color in it at Limestone Branch, and you tasted it and asked Steve if it was okay to interview me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been at it for a little bit.
And we're talking about Steve Beam, who he and his brother Paul built the place and still run it to this day. And you have moved on to much bigger and even better things, and working with Mount Vernon, and then doing the projects with Widow Jane and doing other consulting work in the past. And it's been great to watch you progress throughout the career after switching over from being a winemaker.
Yeah, you know I appreciate all your help. So.
Well, tell us about that, though, because you made the transition. How hard was it to make that transition from making wines and whiskey? I can imagine the flavor and the aromas and the profiles and being able to blend things helped in that transition.
It did and it didn't. Absolutely. As far as not being afraid to tinker, and coming over from wine, I was still making wine when I started working with Steve Beam in the evenings. And one of the things that surprised me the most was how different it was blending spirits than it was wine. Wine, you want to enhance one note, you just take more of that wine and add it to the blend. And spirits, you start thinking, well, I want a little bit more of this, and all it turns around, it negates the nose, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I want some more of this on the palate, and you put it in and you like maybe destroy another whiskey that had the notes in it that you wanted initially. So it's always a balancing game. I love the challenge of it, but yeah, I'm grateful I started blending wine, or I would have never even thought that I could attempt it with spirits. But it's people heard me say it's exactly the same and completely different.
And Scott, you started out in the baking industry. How did you make the transition?
Well, like I say, I've been in the food business. Before the bakery, I was in the coffee business. I roasted coffee for several years and also had a coffee bar. And I will say that probably had more relevance here with blending and cupping. And I still use some of those methods that I learned in the coffee business, especially when I'm working with grains. I'll do sort of, Glenn calls it my culinary process, where I'll cup different types of grains. When I was going through and doing a fair amount of research on wheat, I was using those same methods. And similar to wine or whiskey, I think you're looking for different notes from your different barrels and trying to find a balance. So I will say, coming from, going back to our Jimmy Red, the first year we only grew 2 acres. So we only produced a couple of barrels and then held back seed. So that blend was fairly linear, I guess. We didn't have a whole lot of, and it was really tough because one barrel was really, really awesome and the other barrel was not as great. So by blending those, we lost, it was just a tough call to make. But now that we're pulling barrels that we're able to pull 50, 60 barrels at a time, samples, and our blends have just gotten much more complex. I mean, it is challenging. I will say, people think it's this awesome job that you get to sit around and they think you sit around and drink whiskey all day. And it's like, yeah, do that at 8:30 in the morning. It's not, it's work, and your palate gets fatigued pretty quickly. So you have to go back at it day after day. So that piece has been very beneficial from the coffee side. But then on the baking side, obviously working with fermentations and grains and things of that nature came in a lot of handy. And I think that when we first started, I'd never distilled anything legally or illegally. And Dave Pickerel worked with us, and he came in and he basically, anyone who, you guys all knew him, so big personality. and he was just walking in and turning knobs and going, okay, I'm going to show you how to use this thing. We're not going to use that computer. We're going to use valves, and you're going to learn how to do this. And it was very much like when I first went to baking school at Culinary Institute. The chef said, we're not using mixers. You're going to use your hands, and you're going to learn how to do this. So I feel like that was a good, Dave was only with us for a week, and that was a good, I think back to that time and think about a lot of the things he said, because a lot was happening at that point. So one of the things he said early on was, you can't out maker's mark. And I thought, he's just basically saying, if you own a restaurant, you can't do what the guy next door is doing. You got to do your thing and kind of have your own approach. So I think it's been a mishmash of all of that that's helped us kind of find our way.
And William, are you back with us?
I am. Can you hear me now? I've gone to my laptop.
It's perfect.
I'm afraid to tell you guys, Apple's a pile of crap.
Thanks for that. Small Mac shop around here. I'm just waiting for the MacBook to crap out. Okay, now let's get back to that question I was trying to ask you a couple of times.
It's got the word bottling in it, hasn't it?
Yes, it was. Let's talk about the Wemyss Malts side. Have you been able to get production out on your independent bottlings and get those produced and get those out to market? We've talked about the distillery earlier, but we didn't talk about the independent bottling side.
So we went into shutdown sort of last week in March, and a lot of the bottling halls were shut. So we were reliant on the inventory already had in our bottled inventory in the warehouse. And they've just started opening up again. So we're just starting our sort of bottling program now. But thankfully, I mean, a lot of the European markets were shut. Didn't really ship anything to the States. Asia was open, so it all sort of happened concurrently. But we're heading in the right direction now. As our guests, for your other guests, it's been a pretty frustrating few months. But yeah, there we go. I mean, as long as everybody's safe and alive, that's the main thing, hey?
Were you impacted by the tariffs much at all? Because I know that most of your malts, Wemyss Malts aside, blended malts, but those weren't subject to tariffs for what you did import into the U.S., right?
No, some of our small batch single cask were impacted, but yeah, you're right. There was no 25% Trump tariff on the blended malts. So yeah, we pushed back. We were meant to launch Kingsbarns in September last year, our single malt, but we pushed that back. We just thought the sort of backdrop wasn't right, to launch a new single malt brand in the States. So we're concentrating most of our efforts on Europe and Asia. We've got, lots of things to shoot for there. And, hopefully when those tariffs go away one day, we'll come and see you in the States with Kingsbarn single malt.
Can't wait for that, because I'd like to see what you guys have come up with there. We have a comment from Travis Adams. As an engineer, I love these Dave stories. They're all the same. They're all learn to do your job for real. I love this every time. Dave is what we would call a real engineer, a musician's musician. We're, of course, talking about Dave Pickerel. And except for William, I think all of you probably worked with Dave at one point or another, right?
And in some respect, absolutely. I never got to work side by side with a project, but I've worked around and with, and kind of always in the yes, it's pretty incredible.
Lisa, tell me about your experiences with Dave, because I know you were fairly close to him working at Mount Vernon.
Well, the last time I saw Dave, Steve Bayshore and Dave and I spoke in Philadelphia at the American Whiskey Convention together, and that went just fine, right? But the time before that, Dave had, I'd been at Mount Vernon working for 3 years for 2 years, I guess, I can't remember, 2 or 3 years at that point. And so he popped back in, right? And I had changed some things. And so he and I were button heads, and he wouldn't look at me. And so anyway, we came to the conclusion we were going to do it Dave's way one way and Lisa's way the next day. But you know what? When he passed, the first thing I was like, oh my gosh, I feel really terrible that we had that that headbutt. And then later I thought, no, I can't imagine anything more perfect than both of us putting what we believe on the line and pushing back at each other. So,
well, that's part of the passion about Dave, is that he wasn't afraid to butt heads with people.
yeah.
You know, he and I butted heads a couple of times.
Yeah. He did tell me.
Question for you, William.
He told me, he goes, "You've come a long way since I first."
What?
I said he did tell me, he goes, "You've come a hell of a long way since I first met you."
That's a high compliment.
Yeah, and as Steve points out, he was in the middle of that whole conversation.
Yes, he was.
Let's go back to this question for William now from Greg in Paris. Any plans for a cask-strength smaller batch of the Kingsbarns Dream to Dram, or maybe a distillery exclusive single cask?
Well, we've had since we launched the Dream to Dram last year, we've done, I think it's around 10 single casks. And then we are in fact launching a Cask-Strength from Kingsbarns, hopefully in Q4 this year, providing everything goes all right with sort of bottling and labeling and all those other things that sometimes presents challenges, especially during COVID. So the answer is yes, and it's coming to France, Greg. That's one of our first markets. So hopefully you'll see it before Christmas.
Wonderful to hear. And Whiskey Canuck in Canada has a question for you as well. Are casks getting harder to source for independent bottlers with distilleries keeping stock for their first-party bottlings? Are you having a harder time sourcing casks these days?
Yes. I mean, there's sort of various facets to that question. I mean, definitely single malt producers have got more protective, as they should do, over their trademarks. So if you're going to put the name of the distillery on the label, that is quite rightly pretty sensitive to a lot of distillers. So for us, it's less of a problem with sort of flavorful names and the way we identify our blended malts like the Hive and Peat Chimney, because our go-to is not mentioning, whatever it might be, Glenlivet or any other distiller single malt brand. I guess you sort of join the Scotch Whisky Club once you built a distillery. You're sort of accepted by the industry. You're not just an indie bottler. So having a distillery of our own has definitely helped us in terms of what you might call Scottish respectability. And now we're part of the club, and we're not having any problem at the moment. But I guess that's just because we've been around for a while now.
Are you supplying any casks to blenders?
From Kingsbarns?
Yes.
Yeah, to Wemyss Malts.
That was our next question. Does Kingsbarn malt also go into Wemyss Malt's bottling? I know the Kingsbarns malt is still young, but are you using it in any of yours yet?
We're not, but I'm quite keen to use it in the Hive, but I need to persuade my sister to do that. So I might give you her phone number.
And explain the nomenclature that you came up with to name your whiskeys, the Hive, Peat Chimney, things like that.
So I was originally in the wine industry. I was passionate about Scotch. So when I went back to the family business, I thought there must be ways to make it more sort of approachable and understandable for the consumer, rather than having to struggle through the pronunciation, let alone the spelling of Bunnahabhain. Hopefully with flavorful names, we are making it more understandable for the consumer, the type of whiskey that they are drinking in terms of our blended malts. And so we started with a flavor profile, came up with a name, and then worked backwards in terms of selecting the distilleries and the cask maturation and the ABVs, etc., that would fit that flavor profile name. So we sort of went about it the other way around, really, I guess.
We have a question now that came in from Steve Bashore, also for a combination of Scott and Lisa, and I'm just scrolling up through the list of questions here. My apologies here.
Whatever it is.
Just a second here. Basically, he wanted to know, here we go, the difference between the Jimmy Red corn that you have in South Carolina, Scott, and the corn that, Lisa, you're getting grown for Widow Jane. because you're getting a special heirloom corn grown for you as well, right?
It's a cross, and so that would be the difference because Daddy's Bloody Butcher, Mommy's Wapsie Valley, and Baby is Baby Jane, which we have trademarked as one of a kind open pollinated heirloom cross.
And Scott, explain what Jimmy Redcorn is.
Well, the thing that I've learned about corn in general is that it's promiscuous, and it's also heavily crossed on purpose a lot of times to create these different varieties. So Jimmy Red is just more or less they're all mutts, unless they're coming from a pure strain, and that's sort of why we went to. That is exactly why we went to Mexico. They believe that there are 59 unique varieties of corn in the world, and they all started in that area. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me until I saw it up close and in person. But Jimmy Red's a cousin of Bloody Butcher. If you look at any what I would call like southeastern dent corns, Bloody Butcher seems to be heavily grown around the Appalachian, Virginia, maybe upstate New York, sort of along that area. Jimmy Red seemed to stay in the South. Originally, I think that it came from Alabama and then came up through Georgia and then into South Carolina. And Glenn likes to say James. We have an island close here called James Island, and he says James Island Jimmy Red. And it was a big crop out there, like a lot of corns. I mean, even to this day, or a lot of grains, farmers would have a little still and make whiskey with it. And this just had a reputation around here. So we just felt like it was something that, it's in our backyard. It was unique to us and special. So we jumped on it. But we have distilled Bloody Butcher. We've distilled other red corns, blue corns, yellow corns, white corns. There's a grain called teosinte, which is the precursor to corn. We've distilled that. And they all taste different from one another.
We have a question for Rob now from Leonardo Comercio. How is your blending process different from others that you've worked with? And do you listen to Metallica exclusively when blending for inspiration?
Blending it's definitely a focus space. Just like Scott was mentioning, a lot of times you're trying to do that blending first thing in the morning before you've, I'll actually do it before I've had my coffee, because coffee's just going to throw that whole flavor profile out the window. So I'll do it, just with a few sips of water, and I'll start my blending. And, I don't always just listen to Metallica when I'm blending. It's a variety of different musics. But Metallica helps get me in the mood on some of these. It's certainly like I'm a huge Metallica fan. I'll listen to anything from classical to Reverend Horton Heat to Motorhead but Metallica is always forefront in that in part of that process. But as far as blending, it's really, you really have to focus. And to Scott's point, you can, your palate starts to get a little blown out after a little while, and you have to come back to it. And and each of us probably has our own methods, obviously have our own methods on our blending process and how we keep track of where we stopped the last time. And then you have to start back up at that spot and kind of keep working from there. And I think it's one of those things that you have to keep good notes, and playing good music always helps whiskey drinking moods and blending moods.
We have a good question now that came in just recently from Scotch Now. What are the 2 to 3 biggest influences on the panel's spirits in terms of materials or technique? What are the biggest influences on your different spirits? And we'll just sort of go around here and start with you, Scott.
Well, that's an easy one for us. We're very focused on agriculture. I mean, I tell people all the time that our whiskey, there's the farm to table, farm to bottle, all that, grain to glass. But I think you got, when you look even deeper than that and really focus in on specific kind of knowing exactly why you're using that specific grain. I mean, I think is super important. My wife always has this great riff she does on Wendell Berry's quote, "Eating is an agricultural act." And she says, drinking is also an agricultural act. And people forget that what you're seeing in that bottle all came from agriculture. Some of it's crap or industrial. Some of it's awesome. So
yeah,
that's what I think influences our flavor the most. But there's about 1,000 other variables in the building.
Rob.
It's incredible. I obviously I cut my teeth in making American single malt whiskey and marrying different of those flavor profiles. Blackened was something that was just so fun to work with. Obviously Dave has so many great relationships with people from all over the country, being able to hand select all those different whiskeys and blend them together, whiskeys that stand so well on their own. So I really feel the effect is certainly, it comes again from agricultural, as Scott has stated, comes from the techniques that all of these great distilleries have perfected along the way. And then it boils down to innovation. And this is something that was so exciting to see Dave be so excited about, was applying that the black noise sonic enhancement to age-old whiskey distilling and aging techniques. So we're already dealing with whiskey that's 8 years in white American oak. Then we're cask finishing, which is also in my wheelhouse from my single malt days. I love cask finishing. I love what you can do with the whiskey and how you can change it. Excuse me. Through the cask finishing process. So we're not only doing that, but now we've got the sonic enhancement thing, and that's where like my mind was kind of blown when I first heard, because I've thought about controlled cavitation and anaerobic digestion and all these different ways that you can get get down that rabbit hole. And then there's the sound aspect and to actually see the data on it, to see that that music, that sound has actually affected whiskey, to me is extraordinary. So I would say the black noise sonic enhancement process is certainly that thing that really is what kind of is a huge part of our process.
Lisa.
Oh gosh, and you just made me think of something. One of my distiller bosses he used to say, "You're talking about the rabbit hole." He's like, "Lisa, you grab onto something and you don't let go. You just got to learn to let go." I'm like, I haven't figured it all out yet, right? Corn. I inherited the corn project. They had worked for years already trying to come up with the pure strain of the Baby Jane seed corn, and so I inherited that part. What I brought to the table on technique was I don't cook corn the way everybody else cooks corn. What I've learned with the heirlooms, which is pretty much all I've ever distilled, starting with Steve Bennett, Starlight, and the consulting stuff that I've done, and I cook it colder and longer, a lot longer hold times and things like that, because I've learned with the heirlooms, they can throw a lot of corn oil, and that corn oil burns in the still, and then all the delicate flavors of your heirlooms. So definitely technique. We lay barrels down with the New York grown corn in New York, but we also are laying barrels down in Kentucky. And until I have a chance to expand the distillery, and our team has a chance to expand the distillery in Brooklyn, we needed more barrels laid down than we had capacity for out there. And so I do a takeover here. It's my protocol, our corn, and the staff of the distillery here.
William.
Can I just say before I answer that question, it's so nice for me to learn from American distillers, because I'm in my own little narrow world here in Scotland, and it's so great to get a different perspective on it. So my answer is maturation. It's barrels. And I remember 15 years ago when I started in the industry, and I went to see family friend Charlie McLean, and I just remember him saying to me, "William, it's 70 to 80% of the quality of what comes in the glass comes from the barrel. You need to spend money on maturing you need to spend money on barrels. Don't let the accountants buy your barrels, because they'll tell you to use them 5 times." So I've always remembered that. And our finance director doesn't like it when the barrel bill comes in. But yeah, so just choosing good wood, first fill, second fill, just make sure that it's good wood. That's, for us, the number one thing. And, as the market and the whiskey world becomes, increasingly competitive, it's just so important to have good liquid. If you haven't got good liquid, you're pretty much stuffed, is my view.
And there's nobody better to learn from than Charlie McLean when it comes to this stuff, because Charlie's forgotten more about whiskey than a lot of us know.
That's exactly right. You don't get out of his study quickly, though.
No. So
a tasting and a nosing isn't half an hour.
But it's well worth it.
It's
hey,
well
we
worth
got
it.
a note from Whiskey Tango. Got to go, guys. Another great show. And yeah, it's time to wrap this one up. I want to thank all of our guests, William Wemyss, Scott Blackwell, Rob Dietrich, and Lisa Wicker. Stand by for just a second, guys. We'll wrap things up here. Don't forget to join us for the Friday Happy Hour show at 5 p.m. Once again, New York time. That's 10 p.m. London time. Our guests will include Colin Hampton-White from The Three Drinkers, Maricel Salazar, who does a bunch of different whiskey podcasts and webcasts around the world, and Clay Whitaker, who's been a whiskey writer and spirits writer on the freelance side for a long time now. We were together in Australia last fall, and we'll be talking with the writers on most of the Friday shows from here on out. We'd love to get your feedback. If you have comments on the webcast, you can always email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Don't forget to join us for the WhiskyCast podcast this coming weekend. And if you haven't listened to this week's WhiskyCast yet, I think you'll enjoy it. We talk with John Taffer from Bar Rescue about the future for the bar industry in the post-pandemic era. Until we meet again, I'm Mark Gillespie. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, everyone, and have a good week.